Welcome and thank you for joining us here on Gadigal land, people of the Eora Nation. I'm Melinda Salento, the CEO of CEDA. It is great to have, as I said earlier, so many of you in the room and so many joining us on the live stream. This event has been put together with the great support of Gilbert and Tobin, as I mentioned earlier. I'm going to give them a little bit of a spruik for those of you who are in the room. There's a document on the way out that you can pick up if you so choose. They're competition and consumer law insights, so something to take home with you if you like. I promised also to let everyone know actually how to ask questions. So questions today will be via the Pigeonhole app, ceda.pigeonhole.at, and the password is, surprise, surprise, ACCC23. So while we're hearing from our guest speaker, please log on, ask your questions there and vote on questions as well. You've heard enough from me already, so now it is my great pleasure to introduce today's facilitator, who is Elizabeth Avery, who is a partner from Gilbert and Tobin, and she's going to introduce our speaker. And you'll see me just to wrap up at the end. Thanks again.
Thank you, Melinda. Hello, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of this land on which we are gathered today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. And like CEDA, I endorse the recognition of the voice in Parliament. Madam Chair, Commissioners Carver and Lowe, distinguished guests, and to all my colleagues in competition law, it's with great pleasure that I have the honour of introducing Chair Cass-Gottlieb to deliver her inaugural address and set of annual ACCC priorities as Chair to CEDA today. It's an event that every year we look forward to, but this year the excitement is much greater as it is the first address. And 2022 involved some very significant changes at the ACCC, with the appointment of Chair Cass-Gottlieb and Commissioners Carver, and now more recently Commissioner Lowe. We have some of the most highly regarded lawyers being appointed to the ACCC, including Chair Cass-Gottlieb and Commissioner Carver with very significant private practice experience, and Commissioner Lowe with deep consumer and public sector experience and also a legal background. Quite an interesting shift in balance. It's also pleasing that on the eve of International Women's Day, we celebrate the well overdue appointment of the first female chair to the ACCC, and that a majority of the ACCC commissioners are now women. But regardless of gender, they are all regarded as the most outstanding in the field. But as we continue to strive for gender equality, it's inspiring to see this embedded in the Commission. Beyond the ACCC, this past year has reflected many broader societal changes, both domestically and internationally. Domestically, in 2022, a new government was voted in, exploring a new agenda for competition policy and expressing a focus on competition policy delivering greater opportunities and outcomes for consumers. Similarly, in the United States, the Biden administration introduced a new approach to competition or antitrust policy, often referred to as hipster or progressive antitrust, reflecting an evolution and even a departure from the consumer welfare standard articulated by economists associated with the Chicago School. The new antitrust seeks to address a broad range of harms, including not only consumer harm conceived of as price effects, but also quality and innovation harms and other harms extending also to issues of inequality and environmental harms. It looks at harm to a broader set of stakeholders, not only consumers, but also employees. Meanwhile, the war in the Ukraine has caused not only devastation to those directly involved, but as Commissioner Vestager of the European Commission would say, it has essentially weaponised energy, sending energy prices through the roof around the world. So our new chair takes office at an interesting time. Whether we would describe Gina as an antitrust hipster remains to be seen. But her observations to date do recognise the broad objectives of the Competition and Consumer Act beyond the narrow consumer welfare standard, while emphasising the need for rigorous analysis of the evidence and the economics of the case, all grounded in that key question first posed by Professor Maureen Brunt: what's really going on here? It's perhaps a hallmark of our legal tradition as competition lawyers. It is early days to assess whether this approach reflects any fundamental shift, or perhaps rather just a change in nuance. However, the ACCC's activities over the past year do suggest that it has been a very busy year. Significant enforcement actions, particularly in the consumer law context and digital platforms, and the commencement of very significant cases, including one involving payments and least cost routing under the new broader Section 46, promise to deliver new law. Recent penalty increases that also equalise the maximum penalties for competition and consumer law breaches suggest we will continue to see plenty of activity in this area. In its merger review role, the ACCC has been particularly active. In relation to merger authorisations, the ACCC has had a very full docket. It's had 3 cases before it in 1 year, more than any other in its history. The ACCC has rejected 1 application and 2 others are currently pending. In relation to informal merger clearance processes, 3 were withdrawn after the ACCC released statements of issues indicating significant preliminary concerns. 7 were permitted only subject to undertakings, and 16 further transactions went to public review and were cleared unconditionally. In addition, the ACCC has been undertaking a very broad range of market studies, ranging from childcare and the very long-running, in-depth digital platforms review, now over halfway. And most recently, the ACCC has been conferred powers to enforce and review the newly introduced domestic price cap regulation, and also to conduct an inquiry into bank deposit interest rates. In addition, we understand that the ACCC has made or is considering several law reform recommendations, ranging from ex-ante regulation of digital platforms, a potential for an unfair trade practices prohibition, to a review and reform of the merger review processes. As superhuman as she is, there is no doubt that Chair Cass-Gottlieb's hallmark collaborative style needs to be well leveraged across this increasingly active agenda. Please join me in welcoming Gina very warmly to the stage.
Good afternoon to everyone. I want to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on today. I pay my respects to them and their cultures, and to their elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge their continuing connection to the land, sea and communities. I also support constitutional recognition of our First Nations and a voice to Parliament. I'm pleased to be joining you today, nearly 1 extremely exciting year into my tenure as ACCC Chair, as I unveil our annual compliance and enforcement priorities. This yearly event is an important opportunity for our agency, and I very much appreciate CEDA again facilitating this address. I also note my appreciation for CEDA's continued commitment to sophisticated and vigorous economic debate in this country. The ACCC's priorities must and do reflect the issues impacting the Australian economy, consumers and business. They are our own work, but they're informed by extensive feedback and engagement with many people and organisations, as well as complaints data, much of it, public discourse and international developments, among other sources. The present key issues of cost of living pressures, the price of essential services, including energy and telecommunications, the integrity of environmental and sustainability claims, and more broadly, the significant transition that we are undertaking ever-increasing losses to scams, consumer and fair trading harms from manipulative marketing practices in the digital economy, and, not last nor least, the always high risk to markets, business rivals and consumers from anti-competitive conduct strongly feature in our priorities. Today, I confirm that the ACCC is building on much of the work we commenced with last year's compliance and enforcement priorities. More than a nuance, I would say, continuing to develop and expand many of the focuses which Rod announced last year. I very much endorsed the priorities at the time and am pleased we can demonstrate continuity in the ACCC's work program. The ACCC has in recent times also identified a set of enduring priorities involving conduct considered to be so detrimental to consumer welfare and the competitive process that we will always regard them as a priority in a further demonstration of continuity. I'm pleased to confirm that within these priorities include conduct impacting First Nations consumers, cartel conduct, and anti-competitive conduct more broadly. As Elizabeth has mentioned, the ACCC continues a very active enforcement program. Commissioner Carver and Commissioner Lowe are here representing that very active and tough face of the ACCC, recognising the importance of enforcement outcomes to achieve specific and general deterrence of the conduct prohibited by competition and consumer protection law. We have had considerable success in court last year against large businesses, including rideshare providers, food manufacturers, retail telecommunications providers, motor vehicle manufacturers, waste services companies, dairy processors, and digital platforms, so across the economy. These and other cases led to penalties, which go into consolidated revenue, of more than $200 million last calendar year, including $60 million in penalties for misleading representations by Google, in penalties for false or misleading representations by Uber, a $12 million penalty paid by Peter's Ice Cream for anti-competitive exclusive distribution restraints, an important outcome in the franchising sector that saw payments to franchisees and waivers of debt totalling approximately $10 million to the retail food group franchisees, as well as more than $12 million in penalties against Mercedes-Benz for its non-compliance with its Takata airbag recall communication plan. These outcomes not only reflect the span, scope and intensity of the investigation and enforcement work of the ACCC, but show and reflect the priorities that the ACCC has underway. It is important to note that while enforcement is a critical part and in fact a standing responsibility of the ACCC, we also pursue our priorities through a combination of education, compliance work, advice to inform government policy and law reform activities. This early announcement of our annual priorities serves to raise awareness amongst the business community and the professional community and thereby foster and inform corporate compliance efforts. I'm now going to outline our key 2023-24 priorities, including a couple of our enduring priorities. I'm going to commence with an essential services focus. We have again highlighted competition and consumer issues connected to the pricing and supply of essential services such as telecommunications and energy as a compliance and enforcement priority. In the current circumstances of rising cost of living, Australian consumers are even more vulnerable to the effects of anti-competitive conduct that reduce competition in the supply of essential services, restricting entry or expansion of competitors, reducing choice and continuing price escalation pressures. I know we're all waiting for a decision in relation to the cash rate. You may recall we listed this as a priority last year, so I'm pleased to note that we have had a number of successful public enforcement outcomes addressing competition and consumer concerns during the past 12 months. I'm going to give two examples. The first was that in August last year, the ACCC accepted a court-enforceable undertaking in relation to Telstra's registration of radio communications sites in low-band spectrum that the ACCC was concerned would hinder Optus's plans to roll out its 5G network nationally. The undertaking, given after an intensive investigation by the ACCC, we consider will promote competition and consumer choice for 5G services, including in metropolitan and regional Australia. In November, on the consumer protection side, the Federal Court ordered 3 retail telecommunications services providers, TPG, Optus and Telstra, Australia's 3 largest, to pay a total of $33.5 million after admitting to making false or misleading representation to customers about the NBN maximum speeds of their plans. There are a number of matters still under investigation in essential services sectors, so I am hopeful, in fact will promise, that when I return next year, I will have more successful outcomes to report. Domestically and globally, the impacts of the war in Ukraine, sanctions and what, as Elizabeth has referenced, Europeans describe as President Putin's weaponising of energy and the energy war have caused record high energy prices. The resulting disruption to global gas markets we consider is sustained and appears likely to continue into the mid-term. In response, given the importance of gas to Australian industry, gas-powered generation and households, the federal government introduced an emergency price cap on the sale of wholesale gas by producers. The government tasked the ACCC to enforce the cap and directed us to continue our monitoring and reporting on the conduct of gas market participants until 2030. We published interim compliance and enforcement guidelines for the price cap in January and began extensive consultation with industry to clarify areas of uncertainty. We are also working with government in the development of a mandatory code of conduct for gas producers. In the coming year, we will prioritise compliance with the price cap, and when it is introduced, the code, we expect this important work to account for a substantial share of our compliance and enforcement effort in the energy sector. Moving to essential services provided by the financial services sector, ensuring that consumers and businesses get the benefit of competition in this important sector and that any anti-competitive conduct is addressed is particularly important in the context of the current cost of living and rising interest rate environment. The ACCC maintains a focus on supporting competition in financial services through a range of market study, enforcement, compliance and engagement activity. You will be aware we have recently commenced our inquiry into retail deposit markets, looking at how banks set interest rates for deposit products like savings account and terms deposits, including in comparison to how rates are set both as to size and speed for credit products and the role of deposits in banks' funding. Our inquiry will also consider how consumers interact with the services offered in these markets and what factors affect their decisions to search and switch between products and what impediments, creating stickiness, may stand in their way. These are critically important issues, particularly for those Australians who rely on interest paid on deposit and savings account to supplement their income from employment, superannuation and the pension, depending upon where in their life cycle they are. We're also contributing to the development of the government strategic plan for the payment system. As Elizabeth also referred to, our work in financial services this year includes the proceedings we commenced against MasterCard alleging misuse of market power. The matter is before the Federal Court with hearings set down for 2024. We allege that MasterCard has engaged in anti-competitive conduct in response to the RBA's least cost routing initiative with the purpose of deterring merchants from processing significant debit card volumes through the EFTPOS network, even though EFTPOS was often the lowest cost provider. We are concerned that the alleged conduct meant that businesses did not receive the full benefit of the increased competition that was intended to flow from the least cost routing initiative. Now moving to our enhanced and expanded focus on sustainability. In 2022, we identified consumer and fair trading issues in relation to environmental claims and sustainability as an enforcement compliance priority. We have again prioritised our work in this area, but we have broadened this to take in our work in competition and product safety, reflecting the economy-wide transition to be more sustainable. Misleading claims about environmental or sustainability credentials have an impact across the economy. Consumers, shareholders, financiers and governments are looking for legitimate change, not smoke and mirrors when it comes to environmental initiatives implemented by businesses. The ACCC can play a role by ensuring businesses tell the truth about the environmental impacts of the goods and services they supply. You'll be aware that just last week we announced the results of our internet sweep of potential greenwashing claims that highlighted key problems in the way some businesses are marketing their environmental credentials. Commissioner Lowe spoke about that last week. The report reveals that 57% of the businesses reviewed in the sweep made concerning claims about their environmental credentials. The cosmetic, clothing, and footwear and food and drink sectors were found to have the highest proportion of concerning claims. Everyone in this room will know that because consumers and businesses are more focused on sustainability to inform purchasing decisions and are often prepared to pay more for sustainable practices, that this is of great concern to the ACCC. The findings of the sweep included that some businesses make vague claims that consumers are unable to verify, that some businesses don't provide sufficient, or in some cases, any evidence to back up their claims, set goals without clear plans to achieve them, or use third-party certifications they either don't have or use them in a confusing or unjustifiable way. Environmental sustainability claims will only help consumers make informed purchasing decisions if the claims are clear, are not misleading, and do not omit relevant information. The report is just the start of our work. The sweep will inform us updating economy-wide guidance. We already have investigations underway for alleged misleading claims. I do want to acknowledge that the sweep also showed examples of businesses applying best practice. The sweep identified businesses making clear, defined and substantiated claims. The most effective examples of this included information next to the relevant claims, provided accessible click-through links and presented the evidence in a way that was easy to understand. The objectives of regulators, and multiple regulators are very concerned about this issue at this time, and businesses that make legitimate environmental claims, backed up environmental claims, are the same: to ensure that there is consumer trust and confidence in the integrity of the claims, and in fact in the businesses making the claims. False or misleading sustainability claims undermine not only consumer trust in those claims, but in all green claims, and reduce confidence in the working of the markets, something the ACCC is keen to guard against. We've established a new internal task force focused on sustainability that will build our expertise, inform and coordinate our efforts across the agency. In particular, the task force will examine and seek to influence a range of issues where environmental and sustainability issues intersect with the application of competition and consumer law, including product safety. We have a wider role in this transition beyond consumer law issues. The transformation to a greener economy is changing and will significantly change industries and create demand for new infrastructure. We are keenly aware of the potential for restrictive behaviour from incumbents or disruption that may impact the provision and competitive provision of products and services. Coordination in support of new technology may require competition exemptions. The task force will be proactively examining ways in which the ACCC, as competition regulator, can contribute. I now want to focus on competition and consumer concerns in the digital economy. Australian consumers and businesses are, as we all know, increasingly reliant on products and services offered by digital platforms and offered by businesses across the economy in the digital economy. The ACCC is pursuing the protection against consumer and competition harms from participants, including digital platforms in the digital economy, by a combination of industry engagement, for example, in relation to scam disruption, enforcement litigation, ongoing market studies, and recommendations for regulatory reform. You will be aware that in respect of proposed regulatory reform, last year in November, the ACCC released its 5th interim report for the Digital Platform Services Inquiry. The report recommends a range of new measures to address harms from digital platforms to Australian consumers, businesses and competition. In addition to consumer and competition-specific recommendations, the report also reinforces the ACCC's support for an economy-wide ban on unfair trading practices to address certain business practices that occur online and offline, including those that involve digital platforms. Changes that we all are aware of every day, such as rapid advances in technology and e-commerce, the significant role of platforms in providing information to consumers, collecting their data, influencing their purchases, increased market consolidation, and increased reliance on intermediaries to navigate this landscape has caused not only an increase in the risk and magnitude of harms and potential harms to consumers for unfair practices, but substantially postdates many of the existing consumer protection and fair trading laws, in our view strongly supporting the case for reform at this time. In relation to specific consumer harms, the report proposes that platforms be subject to new notice and action requirements in respect of scams, harmful apps and fake reviews, stronger verification rules for business users and reviews, and new minimum standards for dispute resolution processes. In relation to our concern about competition harms, the report takes a different model, recommending new service-specific mandatory codes of conduct for certain designated platforms that would regulate conduct that undermines competition on the merits. These measures would complement continued enforcement of Australia's existing competition laws and ensure that Australian law keeps pace with fast-moving markets and regulatory developments overseas, where many jurisdictions are already acting on these issues, having also concluded that ex-post enforcement is not a sufficient tool in relation to this area. Treasury has concluded its consultation on the recommendations and we await policy decisions in this area. The ACCC's commitment to support the community in the fight against scams started with our ACCC Scam Watch service. The ACCC Scam Watch services identifies, reports and disseminates information about scams amongst government agencies and industry participants to improve the disruption of scams and work to address the personal and significant financial damage wreaked by scams on consumers. We continue to advocate a three-pronged approach of disruption, of empowering consumers with up-to-date information so they have a chance, and I only refer to it as a chance, to spot a scammer when contacted, and finally to have measures in place so that if a consumer is convinced to attempt to transfer funds to a scammer, they are prevented from doing so. We will continue to lend our expertise and support to prepare for the establishment of the Government's National Anti-Scam Centre. We have a keen eye on providing protection for small businesses under the Competition and Consumer Law. And here I want to note the commencement of laws prohibiting unfair contract terms later this year will be an important change for consumers and small businesses. It will mean, in addition to the previous prohibitions, that businesses may face contraventions of the Act and penalties if they use unfair contract terms in standard form contracts or rely on them in their dealings with customers or small businesses. Prior to this change, while courts could declare specific terms unfair and therefore void, they were not prohibited and no penalties could be imposed. The ACCC has long advocated for this change, so it's no surprise we will be prioritising compliance with these requirements. In anticipation of the commencement of the new provisions, we're undertaking a review of business terms and conditions across a number of different sectors. This proactive review will be used as a basis for future enforcement cases. I want to conclude by looking at two areas of our enduring priorities and briefly also at our product safety focus. As I have noted, our work in addressing conduct that impacts First Nations people remains an enduring compliance and enforcement priority for the ACCC. While our work in the past has primarily focused on education and outreach activities for First Nation communities in Northern Australia, we are broadening this to metropolitan and peri-urban areas. Our focus on these issues has become integral to the larger remit of much of the ACCC's work as we identify the disproportionate impact of conduct such as scams and misleading advertising and sales practices on First Nations communities, and also in our inquiries in the insurance sector, childcare and mobile regional infrastructure allow us to look at the challenges faced by First Nations people in accessing and acquiring key services. I'm pleased to note that the ACCC is also prioritising increasing opportunities and development support for our First Nations employees. We finalised and published our latest Reconciliation Action Plan, I know of interest to Melinda, in November last year, and we're proud to support our First Nations employee network, Mipla Tunapri, that name comprising two words from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages, meaning we or us, and to give knowledge and understanding. Just as we benefit from listening to and being influenced by our colleagues in Mipla Tunapri and our outreach activities, I noted in my forward to our plan our ambition to elevate this influence by enhancing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices within our agency and our work. Moving to cartel conduct. Everyone here would accept as a principle that cartel conduct is intrinsically harmful to our economy, restricting competition, choice and increasing price. And we place great importance on detecting and deterring such conduct. This program is both proactive and reactive. Proactively, we are conducting screening of data relating to markets to identify sectors with likely cartels and analysing markets to identify those with high risk factors. We're also engaging with industry and public sector organisations about the risks and indicators of cartel conduct in procurement. Through this proactive work, together with immunity applications, whistleblower contacts and referral from other agencies, we obtained significant information about areas where cartel conduct may be taking place. Last year, for the first time, individuals were sentenced for criminal cartel offences in Australia. We observed that these recent successes are working together with our education outreach as a deterrent to illegal cartel conduct. I can report we are seeing a significant increase in approaches under our cartel immunity program. Finally, in relation to product safety issues, this year we're going to continue the important work of tackling product safety issues for young children. The focus recognises that children are particularly vulnerable to harm from unsafe products. In 2023-24, we will focus on high-risk safety issues for young children, including products containing button batteries, products designed for and used when young children are sleeping, children's toys and household hazards. We'll support our compliance, monitoring and enforcement work by continuing to provide education and engagement, including through our dedicated baby product safety website, babyproductsafety.gov.au. We are also focused on the role that product safety can play in sustainability. I will have more to say about this in June when we announce the ACCC's full suite of product safety priorities for 2023-24. We are charged with enhancing the welfare of Australians through promotion of competition and fair trading and the protection of consumers. These objectives are intertwined. They reinforce each other. Effective competition benefits consumers in better products, services at more competitive pricing, and competition and fair trading enhance the conditions for competitive markets. As you have seen, our compliance and enforcement priorities focus our work to promote these objectives. Thank you for your time today, for the opportunity to introduce our new priorities, and very importantly, for your critical participation in compliance efforts that will address these priorities. Thank you.
I hope you've all understood the instructions on how to load questions into Pigeon. Please don't rely on me to repeat them, but hopefully I can read the questions. Gina, that was a very modest agenda you have here ahead.
Yes.
I guess I'll just ask the first question. After so many years in private practice at the very highest level of the profession, you had countless daily, if not multiple times daily, engagements with the ACCC. But what's been the biggest surprise switching sides?
The breadth and the intensity, and the increased challenges that the current volatility and uncertainty in our global and domestic economy are producing, not only for government policy, but for agencies like the ACCC, and particularly as we have an economy-wide remit, does result in us, as you have seen, gas is one, sector regulation is one example, the child care inquiry is another, being called upon to bring that expertise across just knowledge of markets, economic analysis, and legal assessments to the fore in such areas.
So thank you very much for posting all your questions. Just starting with the leading votes. The Chair, past and present, has indicated support for introducing mandatory merger filing regime. Is this still the case?
We have been, as the continued team in the Commission and with the contribution of new commissioners considering these questions, we do consider that there is an important case for reform in the process of considering mergers, and we are shortly to take our views in relation to that to government to start consideration of those questions.
And have you given some thought to the thresholds that would apply?
At the moment, we are working on the principles and the case for change. We have put some thought into our experience in relation to thresholds, but it's too early to talk about that.
Sure. Overseas authorities are taking action in relation to alleged anti-competitive agreements on ESG matters. Is this something on the ACCC's radar?
It is definitely, and it's one of the reasons that I referred to our absolute awareness of that in markets that are changing rapidly and that face challenges, there are often incentives for collusive and more coordinated conduct than the Act would allow or we would wish to see. So we are conscious that these markets and the extent of this change produces those opportunities and incentives. We are also watching closely what our international counterparts are doing.
Mm-hmm. So anyone who's flown a plane, hopefully not flown on a plane perhaps, in the past 12 months has likely been impacted by poor or unfair conduct by airlines. Is the conduct of airlines within the scope of the ACCC's review?
It is in multiple ways.
This is the highest vote question, I should.
Which probably reflects how much airline travel everybody in this room is doing. So we have a number of different exposures here and roles here. We have certainly received a breadth of complaints from consumers in relation to service and misleading conduct by airlines, and we have a range of investigations underway. But in addition, we have had a role in respect of market studies looking at the airline sector competition and service for consumers, and in fact our next report will be published tomorrow in relation to that sector.
Right. Watch this space. The tech sector is facing significant disruption from new tech, for example, artificial intelligence and consumer preference changes such as TikTok. What is the ACCC doing to ensure compliance with competition law?
So this is, again, that is across multiple manners of our roles and our powers. So firstly, we certainly have, in relation to social media platforms, recently been running one of our 6 monthly digital platform services inquiry investigations and reports. And people will be aware that, as example of one of the potential consumer harms, we have been looking at the role of influencers. And the question about looking at them in a business model sense, not only the role that they play in terms of their own opportunities in their own business, but what they bring to the social media platforms, what they bring to advertisers, and how their agents and marketers operate as well. That we have recently conducted a sweep that has looked at the extent of disclosure by influencers of whether they receive promotions, payment, have sponsorships. And we also did something new for the ACCC. We used our own Facebook posts to ask for consumers to come forward and to give us tip-offs about influencers that they follow where they had questions about whether proper disclosure was happening. It's a good example of how, in multiple ways, we engage with these questions. Firstly, through a market study. Secondly, through being informed so that we can bring greater awareness to the industry. I had the interesting experience of being on a weekend media program on the same panel as an influencer. And she was certainly much younger and much more influentially dressed than I was. However, I do think that I improved her awareness of the way in which she might be engaging in the business that she was undertaking. But we will be publishing reports of that scam, but we are that scan that we had done. But it will also inform guidance that we want to give, and we can always move from that into investigations.
I think you're understating your status as a hipster. But Gina, you referred to the potential reform of the unfair trade practices, or the introduction of an unfair trade practices prohibition. I think you've probably already heard my concerns about the ill-defined nature of such a prohibition and where it sits alongside everything. But could you elaborate more on what sort of activities an unfair trade practices law would seek to prevent, and would you seek to give guidance either in the legislation or in guidelines as to what constituted unfair conduct?
The first point I think it's important to make is that Australian law and Australian practitioners and Australian businesses have come to understand the meaning and what is prohibited through terms such as unfair contract terms, substantial lessening of competition. I mean, they are terms that can be said in a grammatical sense to be unclear, however, do over time, using second reading speeches, other expressions of the legislative policy, and also through guidance that the ACCC gives, and then through cases, does come to have an understanding that is meaningful and gives guidance to behaviour. We also have seen through the current prohibitions, whether unfair contract terms or unconscionability, that conduct that relates not to the actual terms themselves, but particular practices and processes. So, for example, a situation in which consumers are given either limited time to sign up to or agree to terms and conditions, or in the online environment, a very confusing set of screens that may also be designed to confuse, or have a situation where there is a promotion, for instance, of a discount or a free period for a subscription, but it is then incredibly difficult and cumbersome to be able to unsubscribe. So a whole set of practices that sit in the gaps or the interstices of what our current provisions relate to. We also think that business understands it's important to operate fairly with consumers, and that there will be an understanding in a best practice sense of how to actually meet those obligations. We also have examples in other jurisdictions which take some quite different approaches, some very specific, and some with more overall general principle, and we would bring to bear, together with a general principle prohibition, specific guidance.
In overseas jurisdictions, we've seen competition regulators focus on anti-competitive conduct in the employment context.
Yes.
Is this something that the ACCC is focused on?
So many will have seen that there are members of government who are very concerned about this question. So last week, Minister Lee certainly gave a speech noting his concern about such restraints. The ACCC practitioners here will be aware that we do have an exception in our Act that concerns terms and conditions in employment, including restraints. We are conscious, however, that agreements between corporations, so not between the corporation and its employees, but between corporations, would introduce different questions than the specific immediate corporation to employee contracts. So we have been asked by the Minister to look at the question about whether the current law serves the policy objectives of the government and the interests economically. So we need to consider that question.
As an emerging and established vector for consumer harm, the rise in scams is significant. Keen to hear your thoughts from an ACCC perspective. And then the question cuts out, so I'll make it up. On what can be done to address these concerns.
We have expressed our objective at a high level to make Australia a harder environment or target for scammers, understanding very well that the highly sophisticated international criminal networks that engage in such scams, and that they have a choice, one might say, as to which jurisdiction to invest their efforts in. And so what we are looking to do through, for instance, to enhance, together with work with the ACMA and other regulators, to enhance disruption. We do think the telecommunications companies have been very successful in blocking a large proportion of scam calls. They're moving that into texts. We are looking to digital platforms, a number of which are certainly making their own very important initiatives. We're looking for that to be across the sector in order for there to be first up and most effectively disruption, so scams just don't reach would-be victims. but secondly, the importance of sharing information, categorising what the nature of the scams are, so that there is a possibility to be able to recognise a scam and not fall prey to it. But finally, we are hoping that, and the CBA certainly made an important step towards this in terms of its announcement in relation to checking the intended payment recipients. But we do want to see embracing across the industry of confirmation of payee to seek to stop for the victims whose trust is betrayed through these processes, that they are protected by their financial institutions.
We are very proud to see Gina as the first hipster female ACCC chair. What are you incredibly passionate about for the ACCC?
So,
big question.
Yeah, it is a big question. From an internal perspective, we face incredible opportunities and also challenges across the breadth and scale of what we're doing. I'm looking for us to remain as strongly collegiate, effective, diverse and inclusive as we are today, and to keep growing in that respect. Every member of the agency is there through an absolute dedication to the public interest. It's a privilege and an inspiration to work with people, and I want to see, in circumstances of the sort of workloads and challenges that we face, that we continue to have that same experience. In terms of looking externally, I am very conscious that we are facing a very important time for protection of consumers. Consumers certainly are facing much more confusing, manipulative, very significant in terms of their household budgets, pressures and decisions, and really strong enforcement of the consumer law does assist to protect them in these very difficult times. We are also, many people speaking currently note concerns about both levels of concentration and insufficient competitive contest in multiple sectors across the economy. We are very conscious of this. We're conscious of it in terms of our enforcement, investigation and enforcement roles, and also as we consider merger law reform. So tackling those two issues, they're very broad, but maximising the effective protection for consumers who are more and more vulnerable in these times, and rethinking the ways in which we can engage with the level of competition in markets are the two that I would point to.
Important. Thank you very much, Gina. I feel a bit like I've peppered you with questions like you're in some star chamber or on some speed dating room, but really appreciate your wide-ranging ability to answer all of those questions at rapid fire. It's just phenomenal having you here in the room with us and expand on your agenda and the work that you've done in the past year, and we're wishing you all the best in the year ahead and looking forward to see what lies ahead.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. And I must say, I wondered at first, are star chamber and speed dating absolute opposites, but probably not.
Probably not.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Gina. You can stay on stage or move off, whatever you feel more comfortable doing. Well, now that you're here, I've got to lean into this conversation, don't I? We've got speed dating, influencers, star chambers, and multiple references to Gina as a hipster, which I'm prepared to embrace, but as someone who harks from Melbourne, there are a few standards that are going to be required next year. So just to give you the heads up, next year, I think a keep cup some sort of coffee bean reference, or some reference to your fermented beverage of choice, and perhaps a bit of flannel, but that maybe goes a bridge too far. Thank you both. That was fantastic and absolutely jam-packed with information. Elizabeth, I have to say I was feeling for you looking at the questions coming through, because firstly, thank goodness we've got character limits in that, because the detailed questions that could have been flowing through if we'd allow a few more words, I was a bit overwhelmed. It's clear that we've got a lot of expertise in the room. But then the shorter questions required a little bit of translation, and I'm glad it was you and not me handling that. So very well done. Thanks again to our sponsors, Gilbert and Tobin. Just a little bit of firstly, let me just say this about the content today. I think sometimes as an economist, and when you try to talk about what you do every day, if I said the words competition policy or the ACCC, there'd be a few people who would, perhaps wish I'd moved on to a different dinner party conversation. But it's really important. And as you listen to all of the things that Gina traversed today in her comments, it's really clear that the work of the ACCC has a very important role to play in how we shape opportunities in Australia and how we ensure that the big structural shifts that we're going through actually occur in a way which delivers benefits for the public and for consumers. Some of you may have read the Treasurer's recent essay, and it attracted a lot of attention in the media, but actually one of the things that I had hoped to see a little bit more in that essay was reference to some of the things that the ACCC does. Because sitting at the core of that essay was the acknowledgement that market stewardship and how we design our markets really, really matters. And that really goes to the core of a big chunk of the ACCC's work, and is going to be increasingly important in how our economy delivers the benefits that we hope it will for the public and for all of us and consumers broadly. So, I think it couldn't be more important at this time than many other areas of policy. So thank you so much for sharing your insights on that, Gina. A quick spruik for a few other things coming up at CEDA. Referencing the Treasurer, if you haven't got a ticket for his event in Brisbane, we've still got seats. He's making it more and more interesting by the day. So jump onto the website, ceda.com.au, if you're interested in that. We've also got some events coming up here in Sydney, a breakfast on the run on the 23rd of March that's looking at trends in the future of work. And then changing tack, we've got some of the leading voices who are participating and driving social ventures to deliver better outcomes in our economy and our society on the 28th of March. So if you're interested in those or in the work we're doing more broadly, please jump on the website. Otherwise, all that's left for me to do is to thank everyone in the room, to thank participants on the live stream, and thank you all for engaging so much through the questions on Pigeonhole, and I look forward to seeing you all again at an event in the future. Thanks very much.